Clear? Can everyone see? Okay,
Yeah.
good. All right.
All right. 1 minute to go.
Right. Okay, so.
And then Akimbo, will you let me know just to start, or as soon as it's 5:10, I should get started?
Okay, so once I finish reading out the information I have on my table, I think it will be a go. I will just click on okay, I'm trying to check. Okay, so we are live, and I should have done this before we went live. So please be reminded that this session is recorded and hosted under the IGF Code of Conduct and the United Nations rules and regulations. Participants or our attendees, please should use the Q&A to ask their questions, and answer will be given to you. The moderator would call on you if you signify by raising of hands. Thank you so much. Enjoy the session.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and welcome everybody who has joined us or is joining us. My name is Anna Kamponek. I am the Director of Global Programs at the Center for International Private Enterprise, or CIPE. We are based in Washington, D.C., but work with organizations around the world in all time zones, or most of them. We have an excellent and eclectic panel today. And our topic is building inclusive digital economies in countries around the world. That topic obviously has been very important and taken seriously and advanced in many countries for a number of years now. However, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought even much greater attention to this issue, raising possibilities for recovery and growth during and after the pandemic, but also highlighting and in many respects amplifying the pre-existing elements of digital divides, such as differences in access and connectivity, levels of skills, and also existing legal and regulatory framework in a given country, as well as the issues of compatibility of those frameworks between countries, regions, and globally. So as we seek to advance digitally driven economic growth and seek ways to make it inclusive, that is our topic today. That is the conversation we want to bring also to IGF. And I am very pleased to introduce our panel who will help us do it today. We'll have Juliette Nantuka, who is the Research and Communications Officer at the Collaboration on Internet ICT Policy in Eastern Southern Africa, or CIPESA. Juliette is joining us from Uganda. Then we have Rainer Heufers, who is the founder and executive director of the Center for Indonesian Policy Studies, or CHIP. I also just learned that as of last week, CHIP is the winner of the prestigious Templeton Freedom Award, which is an award given to a accomplished and prominent think tank by Atlas Network. This award comes on the heels of your excellent work on removing trade barriers that were hampering food sector in Indonesia. Next, we have Mary Rose Ofiang-Garontal, who is senior economist and environmental management consultant at Ridge to Reef, and is joining us from the Philippines. I should also mention that Rose is a member of IGF MAG, and both Rose and Juliette are open internet leaders. They are part of a program that CIPE and two other organizations launched jointly a few years ago. Juliette and Rose were in the initial cohort of our program, working on various issues to advance internet freedom around the world. And I put a link in the chat here if you are interested to read more. Last but not least, we have Nicole Primer, who is Senior Policy Director at the Business and Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development at the OECD, joining us from Paris. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much. It's very nice to have you here. Let's go straight to our first question, and the very basic question. I will ask each panelist to briefly introduce their work related to promoting inclusive digital economies, starting with Juliette. Juliette, go ahead.
Hi, Anna. Hi to all the panelists and the attendees. Great to be in this shared space with y'all. Yes, so my name is Juliette. I work with the Collaboration and International ICT Policy for East and Southern Africa. It's a mouthful, CIPESA. And this is an area that we're really excited about, the area of digital economy, because it echoes what we want to do as an organization, and that is to promote effective and inclusive ICT policy in East Africa. So while we've been doing that since 2006, we have more recently, through partnering with SIPE, come into a bit more aggressively, a bit more intentionally into the world of digital economy. But we've been looking at some of the trends shaping digital economy, digital access and affordability through the lens of financial regulations that more recently have emerged in a couple of countries in East Africa. And this is financial regulation through content. One would have to pay to run a website or to pay to register and freely run a website. So we see that as a restriction, but also as a form of censorship. And it does have an impact on digital economy in the sense in that it's restricting the freedom that one has to more readily be online. For example, in Tanzania, there was a fee, almost $1,000 plus, to simply run an online space. So those are some of the issues that we've been seeing. But we also noticed, or rather did a bit more work around the social media taxation that emerged in Uganda in 2018. And it's a trend that we've been seeing other countries actively more readily, or rather more readily consider. So it's something that we've been tracking, including its detrimental effect to digital inclusion for women, more especially for persons with disabilities. And on the topic of persons with disabilities, I've also been doing a whole lot more work in that area as well, through the lens of what is the telecommunications sector doing to enable that community to be more readily online, to readily engage in terms of content, economic opportunity, and education online. Are they providing assistive technologies or not? And what are the gaps? What needs to happen to bring in or to broaden a bit more digitally inclusive economy or digitally inclusive online arena for more than the current community that we have online. But also we have been working alongside SIPE on developing a roadmap to reform with regards to the digital landscape in the continent. This is a journey that began at the Forum in Internet Freedom that we host annually in Ghana. And it's been bringing together various stakeholders in person and more recently online to help shape what the future of the digital economy in Africa should look like. Who are the stakeholders? Who are the players? Who is currently in the community? Who is being left out? Where does digital economy currently stand and where should it go? So we're quite excited on the where it should go, and we're really keen on that. And it's great to be a part of these conversations in seeing who else is doing what in the areas, but also looking for areas of collaboration, which is at the core of what we do, especially when you look at it through the lens of multi-stakeholder collaborations, which is fundamental, in our opinion, to the establishment of a really successful digital transformation in the continent. So it's an exciting time at the moment. But yeah, we'll say that for a later question. But right now, the continent is in the phase of metamorphosis, and I believe we're at the right place to play a role in shaping the path they should take. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juliette. And indeed, we will have an opportunity to talk much more about ways to collaborate and act in a multi-stakeholder way. Let me turn it over to Reiner. Go ahead, tell us all about your work.
Thank you, Anna. And thank you very much for inviting me to this panel. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here. I'm representing the Center for Indonesian Policy Studies. Don't be deceived by the fact that you see a German speaking here. I feel Indonesian. I am not Indonesian, but we are an Indonesian organization. I'm the only foreign face here. So we are having a slogan that says Indonesians should be free to prosper. And this freedom means that people need to be able to engage in the economy. It means that they need to be able to actually build their own wealth. And as what Juliet just said about her continent, I mean, we also face a situation like that in Indonesia, where there are regulations, there are hurdles that make it harder for people to actually access the internet for their own e-commerce ambitions. I want to share the screen briefly. I want to just show you 2 slides. Hope you can see that now. So we are a non-profit policy think tank in Jakarta, seeking these economic opportunities for low-income Indonesians. But I'm also sharing with you the one image on the right-hand side showing how e-commerce is jumping in this country of 270 million people. Just last year, it grew by 11% to a size of $44 billion, and much more is expected by all estimations. An interesting thing is that during this crisis now, so you can see that so many new consumers are entering the market. You see that more than half of them are not from the urban areas. So we see a major drive into the digital sphere, which has lots of opportunities. You see health tech and ed tech being really coming to the forefront, but of course it also bears risks. And so we need to make sure the place remains open while we also address the risks for the consumers. Just giving you another image here, hold on. Yep. So that's basically what we are doing. We're a think tank, we are a policy think tank, so we work with policy papers, policy briefs, and they cover various areas. We have been looking into the fintech sector of Indonesia, which is adopting very much the Chinese model of e-payments, has really penetrated the market here, which is working quite well. Again, comes with risks, and we looked into this in the paper, the top paper that I mentioned there, which was actually done in cooperation with SIPE, so that was a wonderful cooperation we had. But we're also looking into food safety issues, because Anna mentioned just now that we're working on food security issues. We're also looking into food safety, because since everybody now is ordering food online, there are new challenges for food safety, and we've been looking into this. Digital consumer rights, we have a landscape that's so scattered with overlapping jurisdictions of different agencies and ministries, so we're looking into these issues. Co-regulation is a new paper coming out very soon, because we believe it's so important that everybody needs to be in constant dialogue on issues and also entrust other players than just the government to actually enforce certain regulations. Women entrepreneurship is something that was reminded of when Juliet was just talking, because we see at the moment there is this drive to regulate the digital space. And when the government tries to regulate that, they would, in Indonesia, request everyone to have a license to actually sell online. But getting that license is complicated for micro enterprises, and most micro enterprises are run by women, so they would suffer from licensing requirements and other things, which we're addressing in this paper. We have other policy briefs. I don't want to talk about all of these, but you see that we are addressing most of the relevant issue in this area. So much for introducing CHIPS, the Center for Indonesian Policy Studies. Thanks again for having me here.
Thank you so much. And again, we will have an opportunity to go deeper on a number of topics you mentioned. Rose, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Good evening from the Philippines. Again, I am Rose. I'm a community builder for tech community here in Davao City, which is located in the southern part of the Philippines. I'm also an entrepreneur and an environmentalist. So as Morgan mentioned and Anna mentioned, I'm also a member of the IGF MAG and Open Internet for Democracy leader. And as a community builder, I organize community events and capacity building activities for the tech startups. So we can promote digital entrepreneurship in solving specifically social and economic problems in the city. So as part of our community activities, we do coaching and mentoring for tech startups under the incubation program in partnership with universities, academia, and the government-funded incubation program. And so we conduct as well digital literacy trainings for women, for freelancers, entrepreneurs who want to build their online presence. So right now, as an entrepreneur, I've seen how important it is to be connected to the internet and also to know how to optimize and leverage the power of the internet to innovate and solve social problems and come up with digital solutions. Apart from that, in this right now, especially during the pandemic, we know how important it is for businesses to connect with the internet to grow our business and achieve our business goals, especially for micro and small, medium enterprises. So imagine those businesses that are into traditional sales and marketing, and then suddenly we have to shift to digital platforms because of pandemic. And now we have seen many businesses have closed and there's a risk for bankruptcy and business failures. So during this time, I think this is the best time to ask our government, our ecosystem, how resilient our economy in doing business using digital platforms to cope up with pandemic calamities and disasters. Right now in the Philippines, there's a typhoon in the northern Luzon, which is far from us, fortunately. So it's like it's pandemic, and then there's also disaster at the same time. So it's a matter of asking how resilient are we in using our digital platforms? Do we have the right infrastructure to connect those people who are affected by the quarantine and at disasters at the same time? So right now, as we shift to digital platforms, we do webinars and online coaching and mentoring just to cope up with what's going on right now. And there are a lot of organizations here in Davao City and in the Philippines in general who are providing free webinars and free conferences. Even many people are reaching out to entrepreneurs to do coaching and mentoring to help them build our online presence and to help reach our market, even though there's quarantine. So hopefully we can share more about what's going on here in Davao City later on.
Thank you so much, Rose. Nicole, go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Anna, and thank you, everyone. It's really great to be here. I'm with a Senior Policy Director at Business at OECD. We are the official industry representative for the organization, and I also want to share my screen just to give you an overview of what we do. Excuse me. Okay, is that working okay? Okay, great. We're located in Paris, and as you know, OECD is an organization of 37 of the developed countries in the world, but in fact, the OECD is functioning as to develop guidance for the world globally. At Business at OECD, we have the industry and employer federations of the OECD countries, but also a number of non-OECD countries. We have over 30 policy groups. We're enabling business of all sizes and really focused on growth, economic development, and social prosperity. And as we just heard, what's the focus at the moment, obviously, is how we can develop effective policy responses to COVID-19 across all of these policy areas to ensure that we are resilient and that we have both resilient response and inclusive response, but also looking forward to the recovery. Over the past several months, with the onset of the pandemic, we've been developing policy briefs across all policy areas: trade, investment, tax, digital employment, etc., trying to take a holistic and integrated approach to to these issues. And obviously, digital is a theme across all of these issues, whether it's trade or tax or investment. It really has been the source of both economic and social continuity in the crisis. And we have been focused on all elements of the digital ecosystem to make sure that we can reinforce the elements that are needed to ensure that we have the inclusiveness in the continuity in the crisis. We recently at OECD participated to their annual meeting with OECD ministers and issued a report on which is available on our website, focusing on strengthening international coordination to recover from COVID-19. And from the business community, we were advocating at the top line, really this emphasis on international cooperation and coordination, the need for a whole of government policy approach, open markets for trade and investment, and importantly, public and private partnership. And we want to emphasize to governments that we as industry, together with other stakeholders, really need to be working more closely than ever on issues to respond in this current crisis. Just a brief overview of our work on digital. We have a committee on digital economy policy. You see at the top of the page just a general objective of the committee, working to advance the responsible use of digital technologies, looking at mitigating challenges of COVID-19, and importantly, again, focused on resiliency and informing timely government actions. And as we heard from the earlier speakers, we're very much focused on ensuring that we have the appropriate governance and regulatory frameworks in place at all levels, from local to the international, and ensuring that they're connected up so that we can have the inclusive growth that we need, and at this moment, the inclusive recovery that we need. As I mentioned, digital policy, as you all know, it's cross-cutting. Literally, it is the major issue featuring in all of our work across disciplines. And that's one of the great strengths of the OECD, is that you have an organization that's focused both on evidence, ensuring that we have evidence-based policies, but also bringing together in a multidisciplinary way experts from across the various policy disciplines to make sure that we have a very integrated approach and holistic approach to policy making. In our work on digital, we have worked with OECD in something that's called the OECD Going Digital Project. This again is developing an integrated policy approach, and they've also developed something called the Going Digital Toolkit, which allows countries to benchmark their performance across different policy areas. Importantly, we work with OECD to develop the instruments. As you may know, OECD is setting global standards for digital economy policy that we hope will benefit far beyond the OECD membership. And there are some core disciplines such as privacy, digital security risk, broadband connectivity, et cetera. And on the horizon, obviously, is the issue of data. In this case, this is from the OECD perspective, from also our perspective, again, working across committees to reinforce the different agencies and stakeholders that need to contribute to this work. And in the context of the COVID-19 crisis, OECD has also set up a policy hub on COVID-19 and digital to which we can participate. And then finally, just to note, as you saw on the previous slide, we have also been developing a number of policy briefs specifically focused on COVID. In the digital area, we have recommendations, general policy recommendations, which I'll point to later, and then focused on connectivity and digital security. And just as a last statement, we're dealing at the very high level of policymaking, but it's our members, whether it's the member organizations or the companies that belong to those organizations, that are really on the ground, having impact and working with the other stakeholders and colleagues like yourselves to actually implement the recommendations and guidance that we're working on at OECD. So thank you. Thanks.
Thank you so much for your remarks. Just a note to the audience on how the rest of the session will go. We'll go through a couple of rounds of questions moderated by me. In the meantime, to our online participants, if you have questions, please type them into chat, and we'll be happy to get to them towards in the second part of the session. But let me kick things off. So let's dig a little deeper on something that was already mentioned in remarks by some of you, which is the impact of COVID-19 pandemic, in particular on small businesses, on entrepreneurs in the global South. And in that context, specifically, how can digital economy support their survival and eventually recovery? Rainer, could I give this one to you first?
Sure. Thank you, Anna. Yeah, indeed, we're facing an unprecedented crisis, at least in the last couple of decades. So the fact is that we have had surveys in Indonesia that showed that almost all micro enterprises have lost revenue, about 50% actually of their revenue during the crisis. So that's really a profound change that puts them at much risk. There are horrible estimations that show that up to 60% could really go out of business. So, I mean, this is really a dramatic scenario that we're facing for micro enterprises. Why is this? Obviously, this is because of the restrictions that they are facing. That is social distancing that is necessary to fight the virus. But obviously, many of them live off tourism, office workers that would go and they would sell things to them, from lunch to transport to we don't know what, entertainment, general services, etc. So the service sector in general is really badly hit. And in countries like Indonesia, many emerging countries, it is really the informal vendors and the informal businesses that thrive in these settings and are now affected when people stay at home, work from home, have things delivered online. So the solution, obviously, as we are talking here in the governance forum, digital governance forum, is the question of, so how can they go digital in order to participate in that boom that I was talking about earlier? And that's a complex question, obviously, because we have to, first of all, think about the entrepreneurs themselves. So what does it mean? Does it just mean marketing their goods? Is it just advertising them on Instagram or Facebook or any other local platform? Sometimes it's just that. Sometimes they would produce goods that need to be delivered. And then there's the big question of payments. So we're talking about a complex question here. And to what extent is the business digital 100% or just partially? Just to give you a little idea from my side on the programs that try to deal with this, I must say I'm very skeptical when it comes to government programs here, because we often see that the administrations are not really quite familiar with how companies work, what entrepreneurship needs, to really provide the guidance. So the best is a cooperation. And I just want to highlight one program that we have in Indonesia. There is this rideshare company, Grab, in Southeast Asia, and particularly in Indonesia also. And they have these so-called Grab assistants. These are drivers who help you go shopping for you. So you basically ask them to go somewhere and buy your groceries and bring them back. Now, Grab has cooperated in a couple of districts of Indonesia with the local governments to make sure that traditional markets would be part of that. So the drivers would not go to the big supermarkets, they would go to the traditional vendors. And that way they had, I think, 26,000 vendors included in this program. So that's a way how the government can cooperate with the big business, online business, to help actually the smaller businesses to be able to participate in the economy. I think that to me is something that should be further discussed and explored.
Thank you so much. And indeed, that's a great example of just thinking outside of the box and trying to come up with solutions that are more inclusive than perhaps just usual thinking on those issues. Let me turn over to Rose. Rose, you already began telling us a little bit about the situation of small businesses and entrepreneurs in the Philippines in the context of the pandemic. Can you expand on that and also give us the digital economy perspective? What kind of needs are you seeing? What kind of programs or trainings do you find most useful?
Thank you, Anna. Yeah, I think as Rainer mentioned, like 50% of the businesses have lost their profit. And we already know that this muchly affected businesses due to quarantine that hinders people to go out and the business as usual. So there were closures of several businesses, especially those who are brick and mortar shops and those in the tourism and entertainment industry. And yeah, these businesses had to lay off employees since working hours became limited, right? And there are risks of, as I mentioned, business failures and bankruptcy. So we noticed that the urgent need for these traditional businesses to shift their business model online to continue to do businesses with their customers and clients. So for some, this has been a challenge because they were not ready for digital transformation. I mean, their business model was not designed to reach out to digital customers, and it was business as usual. And I mean, for some, they were like business as usual for them because, again, their business models were designed to be a digital platform. So in our city, because people have to survive from losing their job or closing their businesses, they have to look for other alternatives to survive and make a living. And it became a good thing, sort of, because as I have observed, people in our community, in our locality became more entrepreneurial. Like every day, people are selling whatever they think they feel that they can sell online, to the extent that you can already order fish and eggs, no? And these are being sold by your neighbors that you couldn't imagine selling whatever online. So almost all of them create social media ads for their products online. And even myself, I learned how to sell ground coffee on Facebook because I ran out of ground coffee. Before, I used to buy coffee when I travel, but this time I have to source it from the local market because otherwise I won't have my usual coffee energy. So one of the realizations that I had was that there were big companies, like in other part of the world, big companies are closing out, they are stopping their operations, like airlines, transportation, hotels, and restaurants. But on the other part of the world, there are people who are thriving during the pandemic. These are the micro enterprises, and I think Rainer mentioned this already. Those people who are selling basic goods and services are thriving in the local economy. And the access to the internet has become a necessity for everyone. Not just, it becomes a utility. And because it's the only way to reach out to the market. And if we don't have any other choice but to go online, but to go digital. But the question is, how capable and proficient are these businesses to use digital technologies? And that's become one of the challenges for those who are not able to cope up. And I could see two kinds of businesses here. So one is those businesses who are connected to the internet but do not have enough skills to maneuver or navigate their business in the digital market by using the digital tools. Because to be honest, it's not easy and it gets overwhelming if you have to learn all these things at once, given the urgency of the matter, right? And second, there are also businesses who are having difficulty to build their business online because there is no good internet connectivity in their location. So these businesses are the ones who are left behind in terms of reaching out to their new market. So with these two kinds of businesses, I can see that there are different solutions. One is the capacity building to help them navigate their business online and reach out to digital market. And then the skills that they need to reach out to their market and to really compete with the existing, market who are already in the digital platform. But also, these are costly things for them. I mean, for businesses who are struggling to earn profit and revenue, it becomes costly for them to train and keep people who can do the job for them. Although there are freelancers, but still, there's a balance of how should we get revenue or should we get more people to do these things for us. The second is the better access to the internet. Of course, this has been a long being discussed issue, but at least in a simple manner, they can connect to the potential market and clients, at least on social media or any platforms that are free to post their products online. So the e-commerce platform have been very useful to these micro enterprises who are just starting their business online. And it is very important that the design of the platform is easy to use or navigate and secured. So it's not just a matter of having an internet access, but also for the people to be able to use the digital platforms when they are connected to the internet. And of course, as mentioned by our colleagues, so data security is another issue that arise from all the transactions online. And there are many e-commerce platforms that are being developed right now, and some of them are not secured, or if not most of them. So while collecting data from online customers. So apart from that, these micro businesses, our online sellers are just using the social media, and they have our personal information for every transaction, like our addresses, our mobile numbers and names. They have all our information where to find us, and there is no existing regulation to make sure that these online sellers are making sure that our data are secured and our privacy is being protected. So, and apart from that, there are logistics issues as well, because here in our city we have curfew, we have a limited number of days that we can go out. So there have been people are making sure that their basic needs are met. So the employment are down, and people are using the internet, but the internet connectivity or the speed of the internet is not improving because we still have the same infrastructure. It's not easy to add up additional infrastructure just because it's pandemic, right? So the speed of the internet is the same while many people are using the internet. So well, here in the Philippines, we just have to do what we can do. And as a community builder and with the community, we just continue to provide online trainings and reach out to people who need mentorship. We share information online, and we have groups on social media where we can share information and share free trainings. And in terms of regulations from the government, we noticed that selling even plants are being regulated now, because even plants, you can find it online. People are getting plants wherever they can find it in the forest and put it in the pot and sell it in $100. The government have noticed that one, and they are trying to regulate all these things. And even those who are selling online that has no business registration from Department of Trade and Industry, they're also tracking that, and they make sure that people who are selling online has business registration. So myself, I had to register my coffee business so that it will be legit. But yeah, that's it for me. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Rose. And actually, your remarks lead us very nicely into the next question I wanted to explore with the panel. And that is the question of regulation or lack thereof, too much, too little. So another issue that Covered Exposed in is also not new, but comes down to the policy barriers that participants or aspiring participants in the digital economy face, that may prevent, in particular, the smaller businesses owned by women, from being able to do business online. Nicole, I would like to turn to you and see what insights from your research on the policy issues you may have.
Thank you, Anna. I wanted to point to two programs that we're engaged with the OECD and also with our other business colleagues. And the first is a program that was launched last year at the OECD with the support of Business at OECD, addressing digital for SMEs. And really the objective is to ensure that we can address some of the barriers that SMEs are facing, whether it's gaps in digital capacity, connectivity and infrastructure, skills, access to finance, or technology adoption, again, from this cross-cutting disciplinary approach. The project was launched last year. It aims to, first of all, as OECD focuses on, to develop a basis of analytical research, to get a good database on this particular issue, working with business partners. Second of all, to create a network in order that SMEs can share experiences, and again, bridging between both large and small companies. And then finally, to set up a network and a policy dialogue. It's a new project. SMEs are not new to the OECD, but this particular project itself is new. And obviously with the onset of the pandemic in 2020, the focus has also shifted on towards SME digitalization in response to the COVID-19 crisis. I wanted to just point to some of the work that is ongoing, looking at the impact of lockdown and disruptions on supply chains for SME and Gvcs. And this is one particular barrier which we have raised in our recent discussions with the organization, that one of the challenges that the pandemic has imposed is in fact this fragmentation of global value chains. So this in particular will impact the smaller businesses where the capacity is less, also on the digital front. We all know, and as you mentioned, there has been a significant rise in e-commerce with the onset of the pandemic. So again, the project looks at the impact of how SMEs are participating in e-commerce and what are regional and sectoral issues that they're facing and what are the specific barriers. They're also, in terms of sharing SME experience, as I mentioned, the project is quite new. So I'm more giving you a vision of what's ahead as of what's already been identified, but they're looking to develop an extensive database for SME digitalization and experiences. And for many, many years in the work of OECD, a focus has been on not only this digitalization, but also how do SMEs also globalize. So I think that this project brings together those two objectives very well and allows us to more concretely see what technologies can be in place, and then what are the policy recommendations that we need to ensure that we can both digitalize at the local level, but also, as necessary, expand cross-border. There will be a ministerial coming up that will be addressing these issues, that will be hosted by Korea, and that will be organized, of course, in the context of the virtual context that we are all living under. I also wanted to mention that we're, of course, very focused on education and training. This is obviously a fundamental issue and a significant barrier for not only firms, but also for individuals. And in our work, we're focusing on both skills and competencies for digitalization, and ensuring that, our curricula today, they're focusing not only on what we call modern disciplines, such as technology and entrepreneurship, but also make sure that we have the soft skills that are necessary for individuals and for firms as well to thrive and be competitive in the current environment, and also in the recovery ahead. With that, we support and work with an organization called GAN Global, which is a really interesting organization that's focused on work-based learning. It's a business-led initiative, and OECD is also a partner together with the ILO, but it's really looking at promoting and advocating work-based learning, including apprenticeship, and looking at the classic skills such as skills mismatch, and ensuring that we have access to the quality skills. And I raise that because in this particular situation of COVID-19 and in digitalization, I think that this particular initiative has taken on even more importance. Beyond our OECD community, what the GAN has also done is set up a number of global networks. Presently, there are 17 They are in Africa, Latin America, Asia Pacific, Oceania, and Europe. And these are really where we get into the hands-on, on the ground country approaches to promote work-based learning. And that is, so we also want to say that in this environment, you know, we need to break down some of the barriers in terms of apprenticeship and approaches to acquiring the skills we need beyond the traditional approaches. So those are just two of the initiatives, and we'll be really happy to continue working with you as the SME project develops. Like I said, it's in just its first year of launch, but I think it's really an example of a very pragmatic approach coming out of OECD that business supports, and also an approach that will go beyond the OECD membership itself.
Excuse me, Ms. Chair. Ms. Chair, can I ask you to give me the floor? I'm from Russia. My name Anna Nesterova. I texted you in the chat.
Yes, and our issue is time. We will leave some question answer at the end. But if you have a really short intervention, maybe just 1 minute.
Okay. I can wait. No problem. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Back to the policy issues, and again, encouragement to everybody else in the audience. If you have questions or comments, the best way to make sure that everybody sees them is to put them in the chat, because simply we will not have enough time to yield the floor. Back to the policy issues. Juliet, I know you're based in Uganda, but you work across Africa. So your view really is continent-wide. Tell us, what barriers do you see that in particular impact SMEs and women in their ability to access e-commerce from the policy perspective?
Thanks for the question, Anna, and for the contributions from the other panelists. It's been very interesting listening. So across the continent, we see different levels, for example, of affordability, of internet penetration. So different countries have been met with different dynamics. However, an undercurrent across them all, of course, is the gender dynamic, where we see women more disproportionately affected than their male counterparts. But courtesy of the pandemic, as has been mentioned earlier, everything came to a standstill. But largely online went on without feeling the pinch of the shutdown. But when we look at countries such as Uganda, which are very based in the agricultural sector, which is very informal and a bit removed from the digital economy, we saw a two-tiered dynamic, where there was a bit of an exploitation of the farmers because they're completely aware of the markup that has been placed on their prices because of the lockdown rather. But at the same time, there was an emergence of a bit of digital literacy amongst some who saw the opportunity and were able to tap into it. But this was, again, very much along gender lines, the second point that I'm talking about, of those who were able to tap into the digital opportunity. And this played itself out across the continent, countries which have a bit more of a larger informal sector. So, but putting agricultural sector aside, there was still an emergence of other online opportunities that were explored, which to some extent policy supported, but also did not support. In Uganda, for example, we thought that the social media tax would be removed at this critical point in time, but it stayed. We saw other countries also talking about introducing digital taxation to platforms such as Netflix, to content, to YouTube channels, those kind of dynamics coming up, where in other parts of the world, people are generating an income more so these days than previously, by running a YouTube channel, by running an Instagram account. Here, not so much. But also adding to that is some of our policies at a financial level do not readily accept the interactions between the banking systems across borders. So there was that dynamic. For example, PayPal may not be as readily available here for all as it is in other parts of the world. So there's been a lot happening at a content generation level, at an economic opportunity level, but also at a policy level, where Uganda introduced just this past December, the Data Protection and Privacy Act. It has definitely been a godsend. Because we saw during the pandemic, there was a call for the taxi, the bike ride, as we call them, borders, to collect the data, well, phone numbers of all of their passengers. So this would be me handing over my phone detail to a complete stranger with no idea of where he's taking my contact details, with no idea of how he will store them or use them onwards. But there's also a gender dynamic in that respect, because some people's contact details were collected, and then suddenly strange men are calling them, especially the women who received such calls. So while there were some policy progressive steps made before the pandemic, during the pandemic, some of these have fallen through, because ideally with such a law, we shouldn't be parting our information with every random person whom we happen to come upon to catch a ride, and especially someone who we've literally picked up off the street because we simply stopped the bikes and hop onto them. So that was one of the issues that emerged. At an affordability level, as mentioned earlier, there was no reduction to, or rather no position made on the removal of the social media tax, which previously had seen some 5 million people drop off from the internet. While it's slowly recovering, this would have been an opportune time for the state to take a policy position that, instead of excluding people from the online arena, instead welcomes them back on and encourages them to pursue avenues online. We saw education turning online. However, some parents paying a social media tax is not on their priority, especially when their jobs were at risk, when their health was uncertain. So that small policy shift could have done a whole lot more for a country like Uganda than if it had been removed than keeping it on. So while people have largely worked around it, it still remains a monkey on the back, considering that we're also going into elections, and the state, or rather many political parties, including the ruling party, are using social media. So we see a bit of Jekyll and Hyde when it comes to the state. We don't like social media, but we want to use social media. We want you all to be online, but maybe some of you shouldn't, because we're going to force you off. So those are some of the dynamics that we have seen. But also at the content production level, as mentioned at the start of the session. Across the world, we've seen a whole lot more content being generated, massive amounts. We've been seeing TikTok videos and accounts created on a myriad of topics, YouTube channels being created, which are challenging the media as we've come to know it. We've seen Netflix emerge with a new breed of, or rather a different breed of content. But in some countries, we have been witnessing restrictions to the use of such platforms such as YouTube. We've been seeing restrictions to the content that people would like to share on platforms. And these restrictions come in the form of the state saying, you must pay the state in order to be online. Your content must go through the state first before it is posted online. So those are some of the dynamics affecting some countries such as Kenya and Tanzania and Uganda, amongst many others during this time of COVID. Some of these policy notes were in place before the pandemic, but their presence became a whole lot more felt during the pandemic. But nonetheless, we're still seeing the growth in the production of content, which means that there is still an opportunity in that area as much as there is with regards to digital economy. So some of the things I've been following, and Rose actually mentioned it, was the plant community, for example, globally, which has taken on a mind of its own. You can see behind me, I'm living in a forest. But what does that mean in a country like Uganda, which is a bit removed from some of those conversations, but which has just as much economic opportunity in that field? We have the climate, we have the soil, we have everything, but we're so far removed. It also brings into the question issues around ease of trade within the continent and beyond. While it's much easier for some to trade beyond the continent, it's not as readily it's not as easy within the continent. So some of those policy conversations have, come up a whole lot more now than they were previously, especially when the ships stopped traveling. Suddenly, some entities did not have access to the services that they're producing, or rather exporting and distributing across the continent. Yet right next door, there's a supplier readily available to do it. And these are some of the discussions that we've been having as part of the work alongside SIPE on intra-regional economy. What should that look like? What should that look like through the lens of digital transformation? What are the opportunities that should be exploited in that respect? So generally, there is a lot that is happening, and we're on the right path with the introduction of data privacy regulations in more countries, with more conversation around cybersecurity, but also a whole lot more conversation on issues on topics such as content regulations, because all of them are so readily interlinked with each other that they cannot be seen in isolation. So much as it's been a difficult time, it's also a time of opportunity that we need to utilize a whole lot more, but also just keeping aware of what's happening in other parts of the world that we are really losing out on in some of the developing countries in the continent. A country like South Africa behaves very differently to a country like Congo, for example, with much limited internet access, but with many more resources that should be tapped into to support the growth, or rather the economic development of the country. So I think we are sitting at the cusp of opportunity, but our regulations and policies are still holding us back. And that is where the excitement actually is. We need to get beyond this. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And we are running short on time. So let's try to combine a couple of things in the remaining minutes that we have. Perhaps folding the one question that I see in the chat. And then Ms. Nesterova, if you want to very briefly ask your question or make your remarks, but very, very briefly, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Chair. My name is Anna Nesterova. I'm from Russia, and I'm the founder of international B2B e-commerce platform, Global Rust Trade. I'd like briefly just to highlight the economic situation during the COVID pandemic 19 in Russia. And just a few words about e-commerce as one sector that can contribute to an inclusive economy during the COVID-19 emergency. Many lockdowns implemented across the world have required consumers to explore online purchasing options. In Russia, for example, more than 3 months of lockdown from March until the beginning of June caused the e-commerce sales to hit a historic high and exceed 10% of total retail sales. And nowadays, e-commerce is also supported to be one of the drivers of SMEs development. And in the framework of pandemic, online trade has become a life preserver for micro, small and medium enterprises all over the world, and in Russia also. In addition, e-commerce is a way to support SMEs in a remote and rural areas. This is an opportunity to improve the standard of living in regions. And online trade also helps small and medium-sized enterprises participate in the global economy by reducing transaction costs for finding partners and expanding the geography of the suppliers. E-commerce breaks the barriers as it also provides opportunities of cooperation with international companies across globe. Finally, it is fast, cheap, convenient, and allows enterprises to conduct business negotiation and conclude contract without leaving home, discussing the details, the deal details online. Also, with the development of digital economy, access to e-tools becomes the basis for the active involvement in the economic process of the whole population, including women. Having access to the internet, women should be able to use all modern tools for personal and professional development. And you know, one of the goals of the economic empowerment of women is to engage female enterprises in global value chains using these digital tools, which can be one of the additional sources of growth. Therefore,
thank you so much. I'm afraid I think we all agree with the very, very valid points you made. Okay. But I want to make sure we have time for the last final round of interventions from our speakers. And again, feel free to speak also to that particular aspect of e-commerce as an empowerment tool. But I wanted to make sure that before we close, we have time to touch on two things. So first, the multi-stakeholder dimension of local or regional or international collaboration that you've seen or that you would recommend or that we see as possible to advance the digital economy from the policy perspective or through other interventions or approaches. And Nicole, in particular, when I turn to you, perhaps you can also address the question that came through chat, which sort of has to do with the nature of the OECD itself, and maybe you can explain a little bit better the distinction between being in the OECD as a membership organization versus OECD as sort of a global player and sort of standard setter and a research organization. And also how it's not just government focused, there is input through your organization, for instance, into how the OECD operates. And then as I give the floor to all of the panelists, at the conclusion, I would also like to ask, based on our discussion, in your own capacity or on behalf of your organization, is there a commitment that you could undertake during the next year to help achieve some of the goals that we outline at the end, that the IGF supports in terms of digital economy and inclusion? So first, let me turn to Rose. Thoughts on multi-stakeholder collaboration, and then any commitments that you would like to make.
Yeah, I think one thing that has to be considered is to activate a policy that will provide guidelines for local business communities that are going digital, to make sure that there are also a consumer protection policy and that is streamlined in their online businesses, like having a secured website and payment gateway, and with proper terms and conditions, and at the same time to protect sellers from, for example, bogus buyers. I think here in the Philippines, we have consumers rights law, but I think we have to strengthen that one, and also we have to protect the sellers' rights as well, because as a business entrepreneurs, we are also like giving out our investment, and it's very important for us to have an ecosystem that would help us thrive in this digital environment. And the second thing is very important, and Nicole mentioned this one, and I second her on mentioning that the integration of digital literacy is very important, and I want to see a policy that will integrate this in the primary education, starting from the primary education, and not just the entrepreneurial and the use of digital tools, but also the soft skills that are needed to thrive in the digital environment. And the third one and the last one that I want to point out is, as I second to Juliet, is the affordability of internet connection, because right now, in some urban or rural areas, we are the ones highly impacted by the COVID, by the pandemic, especially in the quality of the education. And because right now we transition our education into online, and there are a lot, like as a mother, I've seen how how it's difficult and challenging for mothers to teach their kids because the teachers won't be around them. The teachers won't be around to teach their kids. And the areas that are not connected to the internet, they have to learn on their own. They have to depend on their parents to teach them. And we call it the modular education, which I think really impacted the quality of education if we are not online. So aside from the entrepreneurial community and the economy, I think we have also to think about how we can maintain the quality of education now that we're transitioning to the digital space.
Thank you so much. Rainer, go ahead.
I believe there need to be multi-stakeholder dialogue on all levels. We have an example, a good example in Indonesia when it comes to e-payments. We have 50% of the adults are unbanked. So e-payments are incredibly important for financial inclusion in the country. But for the e-payment operators, the e-lenders, sorry, I'm talking about e-lending here. When it came to e-lending, they needed handphone data from their customers. Maybe not the phone numbers to call the women afterwards, but they needed other data. They wanted the contacts, they wanted the GPS data, they wanted a lot of data. What did they use it for? They needed to do this for the creditworthiness assessment. So how many social contacts do you have, etc. And they would also call your friends later in your contact, in your address book, to ask why has this person not paid us back? So very embarrassing social pressure. So they went beyond what was okay and beyond what was allowed, and they abused the data to a certain extent. But on the other hand, they need the data for creditworthiness. This is a real dilemma. Therefore, what you need is a proper dialogue where business players come together with government players, but also with civil society, academics, etc., to figure out what is necessary. And we are exploring very much the area of the regulatory sandbox, where you can try out certain things in a safe environment. And just now, Singapore passed their Data Protection Act after applying a regulatory sandbox, even in the area of data protection. So I believe this is something that is really worthwhile exploring on a national level. On the international level, just briefly, I know we're running out of time. The Indonesian president has actually launched a IDEA hub. IDEA stands for Inclusive Digital Economy Accelerator hub in the G20 in Argentina in 2018. And so the Indonesian government has been pursuing that, pushing this with Italy, with Canada, with other countries, for a dialogue among G20 and their unicorns and their governments on how to foster the sharing economy, workforce digitalization, and financial inclusion. So I believe there can be something on a national level, and we also need something on the international level. And if I may, I end with an idea also for SIPE, because SIPE has done great guidebooks for policymakers on other topics. And I believe this could really be an interesting topic as well, where think tanks can inspire each other with the experience that we have in different countries.
Great, thank you. Nicole, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Anna. I just wanted to pick up on the point that Juliet made about, as challenging as the times are now, it is a real opportunity that COVID is putting a lens on some of our most challenging issues and some of the barriers that have been discussed today. But really, our goal is to come out of this stronger, doing things better, and as we've been discussing, in a more inclusive way. So thanks for those positive comments as well. Just on multi-stakeholderism, in the Committee on Digital Economy Policy at the OECD, they really pioneer on this particular point. And in 2008, after a ministerial, there was a decision by the leadership to include both civil society and the internet technical community on the committee itself. Generally, we just have business and the trade unions, and in some cases, consumers. And I think this has really reinforced the work on digital. So we can take a truly multi-stakeholder approach. So you have trade unions, business, technical community, and civil society, which really has maybe the hardest job to bring across the very, very diverse civil society community to that work. But we work very closely together, we're well coordinated, and I think it strengthens the quality of the instruments coming out of OECD. And Rainer, I just wanted to mention that we recently in September just held a roundtable on regulatory sandboxes. And one of our supporting partners was the Singapore Personal Data Protection Commission, and this was a very concrete, I think, discussion. We really appreciated going out beyond the OECD countries, coming into the conversation, and we had the Deputy Commissioner as one of our speakers, and this is one of the more concrete projects that we'll be taking forward. And then finally, to the question in the chat, yes, the OECD has 37 countries at the moment, but it really is a truly global organization, working not only with other international organizations and the international financial institutions, but within the OECD itself, you have programs, for example, called the Global Forum programs, where whether it's on competition or digital security or taxation, you will have 100 plus, 150 plus countries around the table. And if we look at the current project on digital taxation, for example, that's being taken forward under the G20, we have an inclusive framework with 137 countries on equal footing. So yes, it is a challenging issue on the one hand, but I would say that OECD has made extreme efforts to make sure that its outreach is broad and that the dialogue is solid, because ultimately what we're looking for as well from business is to make sure that that evidence base is truly representative and legitimate for the many issues that we're addressing. Thanks.
Thank you, Nicole. And last but not least, Juliet, your closing thoughts on multi-stakeholder collaboration at the level of your choice, plus any commitments that you or CPS see in contributing to the outcomes you want to see.
Okay. As our name suggests, we're all about collaboration. And it is something that we truly try to push through in all that we do. Unfortunately, it's not always returned. But nonetheless, it's an ongoing journey. We're seeing more collaboration in not all areas, but on issues such as data protection conversations, which the state started in 2014, and we contributed to all the way up until the enactment of the law. And we still continue giving feedback to the eventual law that was passed. We're now working on the regulations and giving our comments on that. But it's good to see multi-stakeholder collaborations and commitments taken a bit more responsibly, positively rather, now than they previously were. This will not be the case in all instances. Of course, we have various regulations that are passed without any consultation whatsoever, often to the detriment of the community online and those who are indirectly related to the community online. So we still have a long way to go on that. And that's at a national level, not only in Uganda, but in various other countries as well. But nonetheless, there is a bit more, at least much more multi-stakeholder involvement today than there was a few years ago. We also see it at platforms where we share spaces, such as the Forum on Internet Freedom in Africa, which SAIP has also attended. And more recently, we've been seeing more interest from state entities in attending that forum, where previously it was very much something they kept a distance away from. So it's exciting for us. But also gives us hope in the future of internet access, use, and perceptions in areas such as the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, for example. It comes into force, it was supposed to come into force a bit more actively this year, but due to the pandemic, it has been pushed out to January. But we see that as a fantastic opportunity to engage at a multi-stakeholder level with all the actors involved. And there are many more today than there were previously. Like I've been mentioning earlier, content creators have become a very key part of the digital economy. They are driving trends, they are driving conversations in the same way that the media has been doing all along. So we are keen on seeing much more interaction at the national, regional, and international level on something as exciting as the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which is the largest of its kind since the opening of the World Trade Organization. And again, as was mentioned earlier, it's an exciting time to be having these conversations, to be actively and more intentionally pursuing a more inclusive society at an offline and online arena. So that is something that CPESA is fully committed to. And it's something that we look forward to continue doing onwards.
Thank you so much. And many thanks to all the panelists and to the audience for your patience. Clearly, we're past the time, which is a good indicator that the topic has richness to it. And I'm sure we could have spent another hour at least talking about it. Thank you all once more for your contributions. Thank you for your questions. And we look forward to continuing that conversation through other channels. Take care, everyone.
Thank you very much, all.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank
you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Well done, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Co-host, if you're still there, I'll be closing the room now.